Dana White's Contender Series. This is season 6. We are already to week number 7. We got 5 fights lined up for this Tuesday night. I'm John Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the women's flyweight division, we have Teresa Bladea coming in as a minus 675 favorite. The comeback on Nayara Maya is plus 500. And Teresa Bladea is the flyweight champion over an Octagon promotion. She's a 5-0 prospect. 4 of those wins have come inside the distance. She is very, very aggressive early in the fight, looking to close distance and really just size bullying you until she gets you to the mat where she's able to find the finish most of the time. She is massive for this division. She stands at 5'10". She's going to have a clear size advantage in most matchups, but she's also just very physically strong. She's able to bully a lot of her opponents in terms of the grappling, and I think she can do that here. I expect her to get the fight to the mat, and when she's in dominant position on the ground, she's either hunting for submissions or she has some very vicious ground and pound elbows that she stopped multiple people with. She's very dangerous on top. She also has an exhibition win over current UFC fighter Lucy Pudilova, who just fought Wu Yanan just a few weeks ago. They fought back in 2020. She's a pretty well-rounded prospect. The only real concern is at times she kind of leaves her neck out there to be submitted. I just don't think she's really faced any good submission grapplers. And on the Maya side, I don't think she's a great grappler. This is somebody that I don't rate very highly whatsoever. You know, she's fought very low-level competition, and a lot of her wins just came from her winding up in favorable positions on the mat. She's not a good wrestler, not a good positional grappler. She just kind of has to get lucky in those scrambles to come out on top. She also makes a lot of mistakes and winds up on bottom, and I think if she does that here, Bladea's just going to rain some vicious elbows on her and probably find the finish. In terms of the striking, Maya's more of a plotter. She has that Muay Thai base. She likes to move forward with her knee up like Diego Ferreira. The problem is she doesn't have the striking that Ferreira has or the grappling. I really don't rate her highly whatsoever. I don't really see a path to victory for her here outside of like a fluky submission off her back. And I think Bladea's too strong. She's going to be much, much bigger. Maya's only fought people like the tallest fighter that Maya's fought, and all of them have been pretty bad in terms of skills, but the tallest fighter that she's fought is like 5'6". Like, this is the first time she's going to be dealing with somebody that is massive relative to her size, and I think she's really going to struggle with that size of Bladea. I think Bladea will eventually get her to the mat, probably early, and find the finish. Next fight up in the lightweight division, we have Nariman Abasav coming in as the slightest of favorites at minus 115 with Ismael Bombfin on the comeback at minus 105. And Bombfin is actually the older brother of Gabriel Bonham, who we'll talk about later on this card. Both of them are fighting on Tuesday night, so that's kind of an exciting storyline. But I do think that Ismael is probably the less talented of the two, but we'll stick to this matchup against Abasav, who I think is just a little bit more well-rounded. You know, Abasav does have some power on the feet. He's got 11 wins by knockout. He's a 27-3 fighter. His last win actually came against one of Khabib's cousins, one of his mentors in the memorial fight for Khabib's father. That was in September of 2021. He's only lost 1 fight over his last 25 fights. So that really doesn't happen by accident. And yes, you know, a lot of the fights, some of them weren't great, but he is the AMC lightweight champion, does show a decent skill set. My biggest concern with him is, like, at times he gets very sloppy in the striking. He throws a lot of wild looping hooks. He's not great at cutting off the cage, and he does just have lapses defensively on the feet. But when he does actually go to the ground game, he does have a decent wrestling game, does have okay grappling as well. I expect that to be his clear advantage in this fight against Bombfin, who's basically just a one-dimensional striker. Yes, he's probably the cleaner technical striker as opposed to Abasav, and he should have a little bit of a speed advantage as well, but it's like, a lot of times Bonfin is not like clearly winning rounds, in my opinion. He fights very competitive rounds. He's not going to proactively look to grapple. He has worked on his takedown defense, and it's been pretty solid over his last few fights, but that is still probably his biggest weakness, is his defensive grappling. He's been submitted in all 3 of his professional losses. So basically, he's just like a one-dimensional kickboxer, and he's probably more sound defensively, but I also just don't think his power is really there. So I think Abasav's going to have the power advantage. It's going to be close on the feet in terms of the striking. And then if the fight were to hit the ground, that's where I lean on the Abasav side. So I'm going to go with the guy who I think is just a little bit more well-rounded and has fought a little bit better competition. I'll say Abasav by decision is the official pick, and he's going to be the pick for the DGen parlay as well. Next fight up in the heavyweight division, we have Jimmy Lawson taking on Carl Williams. He was originally scheduled to face Kevin Sarflarski, Lomachenko, who ended up pulling out, and now Carl Williams stepping in on just a few days notice here. And we don't have odds on this fight yet, but I'm expecting Lawson to be a sizable favorite, given that Carl Williams only taking the fight on a few days notice and moving up from light heavyweight to the heavyweight division. So I'm expecting Lawson to be a decent sized favorite here, but I do think it's warranted. This guy's a 4-1 prospect. He previously fought in LFA. 4 of his 5 wins have all come by knockout, and all of them are coming early in the fight. This guy has big power. He's only 6 feet tall, but he's built like a Mack truck. This guy has a high level athletic background. He was a 3-time state champion wrestler in New Jersey. He wrestled for a few years at Penn State at the collegiate level as well, and he also played collegiate football at Monmouth University prior to transferring to Penn State. So this guy is an athlete, make no mistake about it. And just because he hasn't really showcased that wrestling background, I do think that is a path to victory for him here. He just hasn't had to rely on it lately because he has that big power. He's got super powerful hooks, and when he's able to get inside his boxing range, he is very likely to hurt you in those exchanges. And on the Williams side, obviously, you know, he's moving up to heavyweight. That's not great, but he does have big power. He's 6'3", so he is going to be a little bit taller, probably just not quite as thick as Lawson, but he does have some knockout power. My biggest issue with Williams is that in a lot of his fights, he's relied himself on his wrestling, his powerful wrestling. You know, he's slamming guys to the ground, he's mat returning, he's really just wearing guys on the mat. I don't think that's going to be a path for him at all against Jimmy Lawson, who comes from the high-level wrestling background. I don't see a scenario where Williams is able to have success out wrestling Jimmy Lawson. So I'd expect Jimmy Lawson to basically fight the fight that he wants and probably clip Williams early in this fight. So we'll say Williams by knockout is the official pick, which brings us to our next fight in the welterweight division. We have Gabriel Bombfin, a -275 favorite. The comeback on Trey Waters is +230. And I mentioned earlier, I think Gabriel Bombfin is clearly the more skilled of the Bombfin brothers. He's the younger brother. He's fought in LFA as well. He's the LFA welterweight champion. He's 12-0. All 12 wins have come inside the distance, 9 submissions, 3 knockouts. He's got the fast hands like his brother, but I think he's just a little bit more sharper, a little bit more quicker, and clearly carries more power. So I think he's got more upside in the striking. And then in terms of the grappling, he's just a lot more well-rounded than his brother. He's a pretty tricky submission grappler. He's shown the ability to chain his submission attempts together and finish them off quite a bit on the regional scene and over in LFA. His most recent fight, he won by submission as well. This guy's just a skilled fighter. I think he does have upside. I think he's going to get a contract and potentially make some noise in the welterweight division in the UFC. So I think that this Trey Waters guy is a clear setup fight for him. Trey Waters fought in LFA as well. He made his LFA debut last time out. He did win. He was a +400 underdog in that spot. And basically the way that he won is he lost every single minute of that fight for the most part until there was 21 seconds left and he landed a flush knee after the referee separated him because he couldn't get off the cage, lands a flush knee and ends up winning. So it was kind of just like, I mean, it was a great knee, but it was just total fluke victory. I don't think this guy's very good at all. The only real positive thing I'll say about him is he's very tall for the division. He stands at like 6'5". He's very gangly and lanky, does have a decent jab, but I just think in the striking, like he's going to be a step behind Bombfin in the striking. I think Bombfin clearly has more power as well. We've seen Waters be hurt to the body. He's just very sloppy defensively. Like the guy fights with his hands down. I think Bombfin is really going to piece him up on the feet. And then in terms of the defensive grappling, this guy's clueless. I mean, he can't get off the cage. That was against a guy who was primarily a boxer, was able to hold him against the cage in his last fight for the majority of that fight. I think Bombfin's a much more skilled grappler if he does take the fight to the mat. But regardless, I just think Bombfin wins this fight wherever it goes. So I like Bonham here. I think he's a strong parlay piece, and that's going to be the pick in the DGen parlay. Which brings us to our main event in the light heavyweight division. We have Vitor Petrino coming in as a -195 favorite. The comeback on Adolfo Bolato is +160. And we'll start on the Petrino side. He's a 6-0 prospect. 5 of his 6 wins have come by knockout, but outside of his knockout power, this guy really doesn't have much substance to his game. He has shown a little bit of an ability to stay in dominant position when he does end up on top, but his wrestling's just not all that good, and he's not aggressively looking to use it either. And the level of competition's been extremely poor outside of his most recent fight against Gadzhimurad Antigulov. He did win by knockout in that fight, but let's remember, Antigulov was on like a 5-fight losing streak up to that point, was cut by the UFC, has been knocked out like 6 times in his career, documented. So it's not like that's a massive win for him. Yes, it's still a name on his record, but it's also not that surprising either, if that makes sense. So in terms of this matchup against Adolfo Bolato, the most interesting dynamic in this fight is these guys actually fought before. It was Petrino's professional debut back in 2019. And basically, we don't have much to go off in that fight because one of the first exchanges, Bolato threw a naked leg kick and Petrino just caught him perfectly with a powerful hook shot that put his lights out. So Petrino did win that by knockout, and I think that's why the line is where it is, because honestly, I see this as a true 50-50 fight. Bolato, I think, is just as dangerous in terms of the striking. He's just as likely to find a big shot against Petrino, and then I think Bolato would also have the grappling upside. He's the much more dangerous submission grappler. If he gets the fight to the ground, he's liable to hunt for submissions, land heavy ground and pound. I just think he's the more dangerous fighter on the mat, and I think that could play a factor here. This fight kind of reminds me of that Alex Morgan Blake Builder fight from last week, where it's like, yeah, I think the striking's probably relatively close. Maybe Petrino's a little bit more dangerous, but I think Bolato is much more dangerous on the mat. So it's honestly like a coin flip fight. I'm going to take the plus 160 value every single time. So give me Bolato by submission. That's the official pick, and we're closing out the DGen parlay with an underdog. So to recap for the DGen parlay, in the first fight, we're going with the biggest favorite on the card, my girl Bladea. I think she's clearly better than Maya wherever the fight goes, and I think she probably gets a finish and earns a contract. In the second fight, I'm fading the older Bombfin brother. We're going to go with Abasov, who I think is just a little bit more well-rounded, and if this fight takes place on the mat at all, I favor him in those areas. We're going to go with Abasov in the second fight. In the third fight, we're going with the Penn State alumni in Jimmy Lawson. I just think he's much more powerful than Williams, who's taken the fight on short notice. He probably finds the kill shot early. If he needs to go to the wrestling, then I think he's got the better ground game as well. So give me Lawson in the third fight. In the fourth fight, we're going with the older Bombfin brother. Gabriel Bonham, I think, has a legitimate future. I think he's much, much better than Trey Waters, who I think this is a setup fight clearly for Bonham. So Bonham wins the fourth fight. And in the final fight, as I mentioned, we're going with the underdog. It's kind of a coin flippy fight. We're going to take the value on the plus 160 side in Adolfo Bolato. And if you didn't already, please like the video, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button. As always, I appreciate the support. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.